My name is Commissioner Frank Avila. I'm a commissioner at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. And the name of our show today is Mother Jones, Labor Leader. And she was a defender of her world, the labor movement. As my song mentioned, the kids were singing, defender of the planet. But Mother Jones is the defender of labor. And as my guest, I have Rosemary Feurer.
Feurer.
Yes. Thanks for being on the show, Rosemary.
Nice to be here.
And Rosemary is with the Mother Jones Heritage Project. And Rosemary, who was Mother Jones?
Well, I think she would be properly called somebody who was a defender of the earth, sort of a Mother Earth figure, a mother figure for the labor movement, the founder of the modern labor movement, in a time in which there was great inequality of wealth in the late 19th century, early 20th century. She riled up the masses of people, said, take to the streets, take your rights, get decent wages, get a living wage. She said it was awful to think that the sources of the earth, the resources of the earth, belong to a tiny portion of the people. And she said, you know, we should benefit from those resources and we can manage those resources. She actually believed in something that I think people would find so radical now, the idea that the people should run the economy, not bankers, not plutocrats, that's what they called them then, not plutocrats. It was a word that was used to say people who were fat old men in corporations and in banks running everything. And the most important part about it was they were running politics too. So she didn't think of them as self-made men. She thought of them as people who got the resources through by hook or by crook, is the way she would put it. And the earth didn't belong to them. She thought the earth belonged to the people, including the coal. So she organized coal miners and kids who worked in the coal camps. She organized all across the country every work, women's domestic workers, but also miners, bricklayers, everybody. And she said that she sort of translated these old ideas about mass action into a labor movement kind of action. So in a time when strikes were thought of as basically illegal and unions were thought of as conspiracies, she said, forget about what they tell you. You know, you have the title, you are entitled to a decent wage, and if you aren't there on the streets demanding it, you're a fool and a knave, and and that you don't even deserve to live decently if you're going to let them do that to her. So she had, a grandmotherly approach. There's this famous quote that she had, which is, fight, pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. And she used every method she could to get people to rise up and fight back.
Yeah, I read some of the articles that's in the Mother Jones Project.
MotherJonesMuseum.org.
Excellent reading, and I recommend anyone that wants to do some reading about labor movements, look at that site and download and read. Excellent reading. I like one story where she was in court, and the attorney, I don't know if it was the state's attorney, would call her the most dangerous woman in the United States.
Right.
Can you believe that? A little lady,
right,
most dangerous woman in the United States, because what she was doing was unheard of, especially a female, not a male, a female was doing this for the labor movement here.
And in some ways she could get away with things that the troops and police might shoot a man for, right? But and they did. A lot of people died in trying to get the labor movement off its feet. But she was a very dangerous woman because she could inspire people to go and take action. So it was usually what happened when people went on strike is the police would round them up and put them in jail. But when you got enough people to go on strike and enough people and their kids and their wives to take to the picket line, sometimes you won.
Yeah.
And that's what she was able to do. When she was served, that particular case was the judge had served an injunction saying you can't picket at all. And she defied the injunction and got these women and children to go on the picket line. And the troops didn't want to take them to jail. Or sometimes, in a famous case in Pennsylvania, the women got rounded up and brought to jail, and she said, well, take your babies and have the babies cry all night. And they actually did. They took the babies to jail with them, and they let them out by morning because it became such a scandal. So she was always thinking of ways to get the attention and of the people and the sympathy of the people. Here are these powerful forces that for the mine owners will put your wives and your babies in jail. So she had that. The other great story is she had, she told a crowd at Coney Island, she said, I met a man in prison once and I asked him how he happened to be there. And he said he had stolen a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
And she said if he had been, or if he had stolen a railroad, he'd be a U.S. Senator. So she was always making fun of the power structure, the powers that be.
Now, how did her experience in Ireland as an Irish immigrant contribute to her perspective as a labor organizer?
Well, she was somebody who had come to Canada first and then the United States in the 1850s. A product of the Great Hunger, this mass famine. But people should recognize that that wasn't just a natural disaster. People think of it as the potato crop went bad and all that. She lived in Cork, and in Cork, the people experienced it as a weapon of the rich against the poor, because even though the crops had failed, they still were producing a lot of food. And Cork is a port city, so actually as bodies were starving and people were being carted off on the death carts, you could see goods being taken to the port down those same streets. And that's what she experienced as a young child, seeing people who were deprived of something to eat while the goods were being sold at the port. And so a basic lesson, I think, came from that. But she also had relatives who had been rebellious against the English, against Great Britain and the Empire. And she said that even when she came to Canada, it was a rebellious Irish spirit that motivated her. So, the Cork experience, the experience of being an Irish emigre, stuck with her. Her father was a railroad worker, and she really learned from that too, because she says when she was in Canada, she watched him go on strike, and that stuck with her. She actually said that she helped lead some kids to help the strike. So I think from an early age, this was a rebellious Irish immigrant population who was abused, and they were fighting back. So then she came to the United States. She was a very brilliant woman, apparently the most avid and able debater in her school, and she became a teacher. But then she said she didn't like bossing little kids around. So then she became a seamstress, a very expert seamstress, and then she married. She seemed like she was going to have a pretty normal life. Yeah. She went to Memphis, and she had 4 children, and then another experience sealed her fate. She was she experienced the yellow fever that hit Memphis, hit the poor sections and the Irish sections particularly hard. She lost her husband and 4 children within a matter of weeks. And she was just completely bereft of family. She made it, I don't know how long, we don't know exactly how long she stayed there, but by 1870 she was in Chicago. And Chicago in that era was a very, it's an immigrant city, probably one of the largest immigrant populations. And she was a garment seamstress making clothes for the very wealthy. And Chicago when the Great Fire of Chicago happened in 1871. She lost her business. She lost everything. She was homeless on the streets of Chicago. And there she got in league with some Irish immigrants who were rebelling against how Chicago was going to rehabilitate after the fire. And she got involved in what became the labor movement of Chicago. And I would say that from that moment on, she really warmed to it. She felt in her heart that organizing people at their workplace was the solution to all the inequality that she had experienced, whether in Ireland or in Canada, her father's experiences, or in Memphis where people died because they didn't have decent health care and decent housing, and they lived next to a swamp. So they got the yellow fever and the rich were able to leave. So she had those experiences. We call them her experiences of famine, fever, and fire.
Famine, fever, and fire.
Right. And she was fired up after all of that. When you think about it, almost you could imagine and say you could see how somebody would just give up and maybe live a life of without meaning and just depression. You could be just depressed. But somehow she found it in herself to say, my life's purpose is to do something about this.
And that's why she became an effective labor organizer.
Right. And she was part of an Irish radical crew, a motley crew of people who I think gave a great collective no to the system as it was, a system that said the wealth deserve their wealth and the poor deserve their lot. And they said, no, we're not going to agree. And they dreamed lots of radical ideas and just made these tremendous campaigns to fight back, without which I think the United States would have been a very different country. People think somehow because we were a wealthy country that people maybe just eventually benefited from it. But I think that when you study labor history, you find a very different story, that people died for things that we count on. People had to fight really hard for just basic conditions in this country. And it was a country that killed people when they went on strike. And 1,000 or more people died in this era from being shot just for asserting their rights. She was jailed. She was jailed, without habeas corpus rights. So we hear about that with Guantanamo, right? Yeah. But people forget that they could just round up strikers or agitators, which is what she was called, and put them in jail without charges. And they did that even though it wasn't really within the law, but they could just do it because the laws weren't equally enforced. So those rights to speak on a street corner or to go on strike were won. They were not a given. And that helped to produce, the first contracts, the first union contracts, the first basic middle-class standard of living for workers, which was not much. But, and eventually it did help to create what we call the middle class. The labor movement did.
Yeah, you know what? I mentioned to a gal that I'm going to do a show on Mother Jones. But I think she got mixed up on Mother Jones because there's a magazine called Mother Jones that deals with the environment.
Well, it deals with a variety of issues, sometimes politics.
Well,
but they did take their name from Mother Jones as somebody who was a rabble-rouser. So they think of themselves as rabble-rousing journalists. And yet they really haven't educated people about that there was a real Mother Jones.
And if they're using that name, they should, every issue that they have, they should have who was Mother Jones.
Right.
And I just wonder if that's copyright, that Mother Jones.
Oh, well, I don't know, but I know that, we're kind of bugged because, we're doing this project on the Mother Jones Museum, and we think they owe her something. The magazine does.
They should contribute.
And they should contribute.
You hear that, Mother Jones?
Yes, that's right.
I think if you're using that name, you should contribute to the Mother Jones
Heritage Project.
Project. Now, why don't more people know about her?
I think because she was so controversial and because we forgot this era of history. So when the labor movement got fat, you know, in
Sure.
the mid 20th century, she was not as respectable. She was somebody, you know, they wanted to say, well, we don't have to be so full of conflict. So they forgot her, and people forgot the origins of this history, and also because she wasn't a typical feminist. So when women's history got started, she didn't fit. She was not, her main issue wasn't suffrage. So a lot of historians who might have been credited with trying to revive her memory did not. And so I think that's, but I think she's being revived. She's being revived in Ireland. They started a Mother Jones Heritage Festival. Just last year, she was inducted into the Irish American Hall of Fame in Chicago. And,
Yes.
you know, they have this lovely poster in which a quote that connects her with James Connolly is on that poster. And I think it just expresses her and Irish leaders like James Connolly so beautifully. The phrase is, the powerful only appear powerful because we have been on our knees. Let us rise.
Yeah.
And that was a slogan that Mother Jones repeated quite a lot. And she was actually a friend of James Connolly. She was actually, he came to the United States. He was in Irish exile for a while, and they became friends. They campaigned together, and she taught him some things, and I think she learned from him as well. And it was to Mother Jones that James Connolly said that he was going to go back to Ireland and launch a rebellion, to join the rebellion there that was ongoing, and give up or abandon trying to make the rebellion in the United States. And of course, he lost his life in the 1916 Easter uprising. And so, you know, she was a global thinker. She had this other famous phrase, I am a citizen of the world. And she thought of human rights as the most important thing above, you know, racial identity, above gender even. I think she thought everybody is a human being and we all deserve rights. So, you know, in a time when most women are of that era are remembered for the suffrage campaign, she was a labor activist. But she was a global thinker, and she thought that we have to get beyond these ethnic divisions. So one of the other things that I think she should be credited for is really trying to do interracial organizing and interethnic organizing. So especially in the mines, where the mine owners, actually people might be surprised at this, but it wasn't an accident that they had so many different ethnic groups in mines. It was a racial strategy. They thought, we were going to bring in Italians and Polacks and Hungarians and Slovaks, and they'll all mix up and they'll never unite. And they thought it was an insurance. They all actually called it an insurance against strikes. And she said, nah, we're not going to accept that either. And so she really believed in overcoming those racial barriers. She believed that African Americans and Italians were some of the best unionists, and she would actually berate anybody who said, you know, I don't want to be together with those people because they're lower than us. Yeah. And she, you know, there's a famous moment in which this African American woman came up to her and said, "Thank you for standing up for us." And she said, "Let me kiss your the hem of your skirt. I'm you know, in honor of you." And she said, "You'll do nothing of the kind. You know, you will hug me directly. You will embrace me directly. No, you're never going to stoop to your knees." So, you know, she really embraced interracial unity, and I think she has to be credited with that. Also, you know, industrial unionism. So she really believed in crossing skill lines. So in Chicago, I think we have a picture available on the Chicago garment workers strike, she'd like to put girls and women at the head of the parade
Yeah.
and say, you know, you are really going to have to fight for this union. It's the only thing that's going to save you against money, against the power of money.
Yeah.
And so, you know, these amazing moments in Chicago history, she's there. She seems to be everywhere. We have a map on our website, the motherjonesmuseum.org, that has just a fraction of all the places that she organized. And it's just, you know, the United States, Canada, Mexico, she's all over the place. And so she's like a Johnny Appleseed of unionism.
Yeah.
You know, when you think, oh, there's this big strike here, well, you find Mother Jones was there. She'd go, like, well, in Bloomington, Illinois, they had a streetcar strike and they were losing. She came there and she said, why aren't you all just taking over the streetcars and massing on them? And they did, and they won. And that union exists to this day. So there's a lot of her legacy that if you listen carefully enough, it's sort of blowing in the winds, you know, and that's what our purpose is, to make people more aware of all of the people who contributed to that history.
Yeah, Mother Jones. Now, how did this museum, now you want to make a museum now, of Mother Jones, because as you mentioned, her name was very popular and then it declined, and very few people knew who was Mother Jones. Now you want to do a museum.
Right. Well, we've been inspired by the Cork example. They have a Cork festival for her, and it's been very successful. And we've been lucky that the place that she's buried in Mount Olive, Illinois, where she had this mass funeral. 40,000 people came to see her in 1930 and pay their respects to her in 1930 when she died. It was a tremendous moment in labor history, people paying their respects. And then 6 years later, they built a huge monument to her in Mount Olive. Now, Mount Olive, you might think, why was she buried there?
Yes.
But they honored her for years, and it was the one place in the United States that sought to remember her, and Illinois miners did. And so they built this, in the midst of the Depression, this huge monument to her. And recently, the city decided it's about time that we have a museum. So they are actually providing space and basic services for a museum, and it's going to be in business. They've pledged by contract through a grant from the state of Illinois that they will always have this museum open. So it's something that all we have to do, although that's a lot, is to provide the exhibits. And the other thing that we want to do is, if you look at that map, you'll see she was not limited to Mount Olive. She was buried there because there was this vibrant labor movement at the time that was centered there. But there's all these places, and I think that one of the things that we should do is to think about how we take her to the streets, just as she would have liked to have. And so one of the things we want to do is have markers all over the country in this Mother Jones Heritage Project with the museum as an anchor. So with the museum as an anchor, we can have a place that people can visit, but also create heritage trails. One of the things that she believed was that people should think of the streets as their streets and a place that history is created. And so we want to remind people of those marches for a living wage, you know, major unemployment campaigns that she was taking part in. So one of the ideas here is that we will have a project that touches not only Mount Olive in Illinois, I mean, all over Chicago are places that should have markers, because they're really important moments that she contributed to. But the other thing is, the reason that Mother Jones is buried in Mount Olive is she wanted to remind us of the ordinary people who contributed to history. She always said it's not only about people, great leaders like her, but it was also about ordinary people deciding to take history into their own hands. And so she wanted people to remember that these miners had died for industrial liberty, and that they had to remember those miners as well. So that's what we want to do. We want not only, this isn't only about her, it's about the ordinary people and their struggles. So we have to remind people things, this was a movement, and a lot of people contributed to it. It wasn't like Mother Jones came along and magic happened, although she had a lot of magic.
Well,
it's amazing what she did, but still, if ordinary people hadn't joined with her, they would have gotten nowhere.
Right. And also they needed someone that they could feel that if she comes, she gave them the strength.
Right.
Mother Jones is with us. We
Yes.
can't fail, and we're going to move on. Even if they fail, they said we're going to continue because we're going to succeed in some period of time. That's what Mother Jones
exactly.
gave her.
Yeah, and I've got this interesting reflection on that because I did a short documentary on Mother Jones, and when we show it, a lot of times people say, "Where's the Mother Jones in me?" And that's exactly what happened to her in her lifetime. People would say, well, if Mother Jones was here, she'd say we ought to do this, and so they would do it. They'd go and protest. They'd be willing to go to jail because she was willing to go to jail.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of karma, I think.
And I don't. The fight is still here.
Yeah, it's exactly the same issues.
Same issues, living wages, raising a family.
The ethnic divisions, the idea that, Latinos are taking my job.
Sure.
That same thing happened in that era.
And they use that to
divide
separate,
people.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea, at the heart of it is, what I think what happened in the late 19th century is this idea of social Darwinism crept in. The idea that some people deserve to be at the top and the people who are at the bottom deserve to be at the bottom, and it's their fault. And I think starting in the 80s, that was revived strategically.
That's why who's the most important person now are the teachers. We should help the teachers so they could educate the kids.
Exactly, and I have to say this.
That's the key. We need the teachers to educate the kids.
And we had this fundraiser, and we had the teachers. The C2U was there at the fundraiser in Chicago. We're really grateful, but also involved in this project are teachers.
And
they're going to help us write curricula.
That's why we should help the teachers, CTU, anyone, because they are the main. The mother, the parent, is the mentor of the kids, but who's the next one?
Right.
Maybe it's the teacher. Maybe the teachers are the mothers too sometimes.
Yes, I think that was such an important, everybody who has credits ideas, oftentimes they're crediting their teachers, even if they don't acknowledge it.
Right. So let's support our teachers.
Yes.
Let's support the teachers.
All right. Well, thank you.
Good show.
Thank you.
Beautiful.